A courtroom. A judge who has seen 100 cases exactly like this one, flipping through paperwork without much interest. A man and a woman sitting side by side, not quite touching, both of them just hoping this will be quick. On the form in front of the judge, there's a small lie, written carefully. The kind of lie you tell when you want something over with fast. It takes her about 30 seconds to catch it, and when she does, the story this man has spent 6 months telling himself, that none of it ever really counted, that it was just an accident between two people who barely knew each other, comes apart, right there, in front of both of them. That man is Ross Geller. By the time the camera stopped rolling on Friends in 2004, he had been married 3 times and divorced 3 times before turning 40. 3 separate weddings, 3 separate women, 3 completely different reasons the vows came apart. That courtroom lie was only the 3rd ending. The first one, he never saw coming at all. The second one, he caused with a single word he didn't even mean to say. Tonight, we're not going to laugh at any of that. It would be easy to. The internet has spent 30 years turning Ross Geller into a punchline. The guy, the meme, the "we were on a break" guy. That's not what tonight is. Tonight, we're going to walk through all 3 marriages, slowly, in order, the way you'd walk through 3 rooms in the same house, and ask a quieter question underneath each one. What was he actually afraid of? Every single time. And did it ever really change? You'll hear about the actress who played his first wife for a single episode before quietly disappearing from the show, replaced without explanation. You'll hear the exact sentence he said, by accident, at his own wedding to someone else, a line not even the writers had planned. And you'll hear how that lie in the courtroom, the one you just watched fall apart, traces all the way back to a fear that started years before any of these 3 women ever met him. This is Sleepy Couch Decoded. If you're here after a long day or in the middle of a long night that doesn't want to end, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Get comfortable. Let your shoulders drop. Nothing about tonight requires you to stay sharp or keep track of details. If anything, the opposite. The story will still make sense if half of it drifts past you on the way to sleep. That's what it's here for. Tonight is a little different from some of our other episodes. Instead of moving through a scattered handful of facts, you're going to follow one continuous thread. 1 man, 3 weddings, spread out across 10 years of a show most of us know by heart. Ross Geller is often remembered as the show's most emotionally intense character. The one who cries the most, panics the most, holds on the longest. What's talked about less often is the shape underneath all of that. 3 marriages that ended for 3 completely different reasons on the surface. A divorce he didn't choose, a divorce his own mistake triggered, and a divorce built entirely on something he hid. And yet, if you look closely, if you let the details settle instead of rushing past them, the same fear seems to be standing behind all 3 doors. Not the fear of being alone, exactly. Something closer to the fear of watching control slip out of his hands and not being able to stop it. It's worth saying, before we go any further, that this isn't really a story about a bad person. It's easier, culturally, to sort a character like this into a simple box, hero or villain, selected, orthotic, or insufferable, and move on. Real patterns rarely sort that cleanly, and neither she watched closely enough does Ross. He's generous with his friends. He's a devoted, if occasionally overbearing, father. He's capable of real warmth, real humor, real tenderness in the quiet moments the show doesn't always get credit for writing. None of that cancels out the pattern we're about to walk through. It just means the pattern is more interesting and more worth understanding slowly than a punchline could ever manage to be. We're not here to hand down a verdict on Ross Geller tonight. People who worked on this show for decades still don't fully agree on how to feel about him. and neither do the people who've spent 20 years rewatching him. What we can do is look at what actually happened, in order, slowly, and let you draw your own conclusions somewhere around the edges of sleep. Let's begin at the very start, before Central Perk, before the fountain, before any of the other 5 friends had even really become a group. Let's begin with a marriage that was already ending in the very first episode. When Friends opens in September of 1994, Ross Geller is already a divorced man. His ex-wife, Carol, lifted him not for another man, but for a woman, Susan Bunch. And by the time viewers meet Ross in the pilot episode, sitting slumped in Central Perk, describing his marriage as over in the most defeated voice imaginable, the divorce isn't a subplot he's working through. It's the wound the entire series opens with. Ross is not a man choosing to leave a relationship. He's a man the relationship left in a way he never saw coming and never had any say in. Picture the scene the way it actually plays out. Slowly, the way you might replay an old memory rather than rush through it. A coffee shop, orange couches, the low murmur of a room full of strangers who don't know each other's names. Ross walks in low and quiet, barely upright, and when his friends ask what's wrong, what comes out of him isn't anger so much as bewilderment. The particular disorientation of someone whose whole imagined future dissolved somewhere between one ordinary Tuesday and the next. He says, almost pleading with the room, that he just wants to be married again. Not a new love, not adventure, not freedom from a bad situation, just the stability itself, restored as quickly as possible. As though marriage were less a relationship with a specific person and more a room he'd been locked out of and needed to find his way back into immediately. It's a small, throwaway line in the show's very first episode. It's also, in hindsight, close to a thesis statement for the next 10 years of his life. Carol was Ross's college girlfriend, someone he'd known long before any of the other 5 friends existed as a group. Someone whose life had been braided into his for years before the show's first frame. According to the show's own backstory, Carol and Susan met at a gym, and what began there quietly became an affair while Carol was still married to Ross. That detail matters, and it's worth naming plainly rather than softening it. This isn't only a story about a woman discovering something true about herself. It's also, underneath that, a story about infidelity, about a marriage that ended partly because someone inside it had already started building a different life before officially stepping out of the old one. Ross wasn't simply left. He was, in a sense, already being left for a while before anyone told him, if you're doing the arithmetic already, you can probably guess what that means for the very first lesson this show ever teaches its main character. Before Ross has said a single line about wanting to get married again. And in the pilot, almost immediately, he does say exactly that, practically pleading it out loud to his friends. I just want to be married again. He has already learned that the person closest to him was capable of building something else. Secretly, while he still believed they were building a life together, that's not a small thing to carry into every relationship that follows. It's the kind of thing that would make almost anyone reach a little too hard, a little too fast, for proof that the next person isn't doing the same thing behind a closed door somewhere. There's a small, almost forgotten piece of production trivia buried inside this storyline that most viewers have never noticed, because it happened so early and so quietly. In the second episode of the entire series, the one with the sonogram at the end, Carol is played by an actress named Anita Barone. Just one appearance. By the following episode, without any explanation offered to the audience, a different actress, Jane Sibbett, has stepped into the role. And she's the one most fans actually remember as Carol, the one who plays the character for more than a dozen episodes across the show's run. According to reporting on the recasting, Barone had her sights set on a different, more permanent role elsewhere, and left to pursue it. She went on to book a series regular part on another sitcom not long after. Marta Kaufman, one of the show's co-creators, reportedly saw something in Jane Sibbitt's take on the character that she wanted to keep and asked her to stay on as a recurring presence. It's a strange, quiet footnote to sit with. The woman who leaves Ross, the wound the whole show opens with, was herself quietly replaced and recast within the first month of filming, and almost nobody watching at home ever noticed the seam. Carol is pregnant with Ross's son, Ben, when the series begins. Another thing entirely outside Ross's control, arriving at the exact moment his marriage is ending rather than beginning. He's about to become a father and an ex-husband within the same handful of episodes. Two enormous life changes stacked on top of each other, neither one chosen. Both one arriving whether he was ready or not. The tension between Ross and Susan doesn't resolve quietly either. Across the show's first season, Ross makes little effort to hide his resentment toward the woman he holds responsible for ending his marriage. And Susan, for her part, isn't especially interested in making peace with a man who still sees her as an intruder in a family that's technically about to include her. It comes to a head in the first season finale, the one with the birth, when Carol goes into labor and Ross and Susan, still bickering, still competing for whatever version of fatherhood and motherhood they each think they're entitled to, get thrown out of the delivery room entirely for arguing too loudly in front of a woman actively in labor. Phoebe, of all people, ends up locking the two of them in a supply closet together until they can behave, delivering a small, blunt lecture about how the baby isn't even born yet and already has 3 adults fighting over who gets to love him the most, pointing out, gently but firmly, that he's the luckiest baby in the world for it, if only the grown-ups could see it that way. It's a scene that plays for comedy on the surface. Underneath it, though, is Ross doing the exact thing he'll keep doing for the rest of the series, standing in a room that isn't really about him, at a moment that should be about someone else entirely, unable to fully let go of his own sense that something rightfully his is slipping into someone else's hands. Even the baby's name, in the end, arrives by accident rather than careful decision, inspired, according to the episode, by a janitor's name tag Phoebe happens to be wearing during the very same lecture. Ben, a small, almost throwaway detail, and yet it fits the chapter it's embedded in. Even the one unambiguously good thing to come out of Ross's first marriage's collapse arrives sideways, unplanned, decided by circumstance rather than anyone's intention. Then, in January of 1996, in the show's second season, came an episode that tested how far a mainstream American network was willing to go on the subject of a same-sex wedding. The one with the lesbian wedding, in which Carol and Susan marry, with Ross in attendance, walking his ex-wife down the aisle to give her away to the woman she left him for. It's worth sitting with how unusual that was for network television at the time. According to reporting on the episode's release, 2 local NBC affiliates, one in Texas, one in Ohio, refused to air it at all, citing concerns about community standards. NBC itself, bracing for backlash, reportedly staffed more than 100 phone operators in anticipation of an overwhelming number of complaint calls. They received 2. The episode aired to over 30 million viewers, became the highest-rated episode of American television that week, and the cast went on to receive a GLAAD award for it, the same episode 2 small-town stations had quietly refused to air, winning recognition from the organization built specifically to advocate for the community those stations had tried to keep off their screens. What's easy to miss watching that episode now is Ross's face throughout most of it. He gives a toast, he's gracious, mostly the way the show needed him to be for the story to land. But there's a strain underneath the graciousness that the writing lets slip through in small moments. A joke that lands a little too pointed. A silence that goes on a beat too long. Picture the room for a second. Folding chairs arranged for a ceremony. His parents seated somewhere near the front trying to look supportive. His 4 other friends watching him as closely as they're watching the brides, waiting to see how he'll hold up. He is quite literally standing at the wedding of the two people who took away a life he thought he already had, performing happiness for a room full of people because the alternative, visible resentment, visible hurt, would make him the villain of someone else's wedding day. There's a particular kind of exhaustion in that position, the exhaustion of managing your own face for other people's comfort while something in your chest is doing something else entirely. He learned, in that moment, something that would apparently follow him for the rest of the series, that the world could rearrange itself completely around him without asking his permission first, and that his only real choice was how convincingly he could smile through it. Hold on to that feeling for a moment. The floor moving without warning, the rules changing after he'd already agreed to them. We're going to see that exact shape come back twice more before tonight is over. Though the next two times, it won't be quite so easy to say the change wasn't, at least partly, his own doing. Notice, too, what Ross does with his professional life running alongside all of this, because it tells its own quiet version of the same story. Across the series, Ross builds a career as a paleontologist, a man who spends his working hours reconstructing enormous, ancient, extinct creatures from small fragments of bone, piecing together certainty out of incomplete evidence, standing in front of lecture halls as the unquestioned authority on subjects that can't talk back or leave him or change their minds about who they are. It's a profession built almost entirely around control. Control over facts, control over interpretation, control over a version of the past that, unlike his own past, holds still and lets itself be studied. The show plays his career mostly as a running joke, the dinosaur-obsessed friend nobody wants to get started on his research. But there's a quieter reading available if you're looking for one. A man who keeps losing his grip on the people closest to him has built an entire professional identity around a kind of subject matter that can never do that to him. Dinosaur bones don't leave. They don't lie. They don't say the wrong name at the altar. They just wait patiently in the dark for someone like Ross to arrange them into a shape that finally makes sense. Carol and Susan raise Ben together for the rest of the series, largely off-screen, appearing in occasional episodes as co-parents navigating custody and holidays with Ross. It becomes, eventually, one of the more quietly stable relationships in the entire show. 3 adults, a shared child, an arrangement none of them would have chosen for themselves at the outset, settling slowly into something that functions. Ross's first marriage didn't end because he did something wrong. Exactly. It ended because his wife discovered something true about herself that had nothing to do with him at all, and there was nothing in his power that could have changed that outcome. If the first ending taught him anything, it may have been the wrong lesson entirely. That love can be taken from you with no warning, for reasons that have nothing to do with your own behavior, and that the only real defense against that feeling is never quite letting your guard back down again. Some of that fear, it turns out, was already planted long before Carol ever entered the picture. Across the series, Ross is consistently framed, in flashbacks and family scenes alike, as the favored child in the Geller household, the son who got the encouragement, the praise, the benefit of the doubt, while Monica, his younger sister, absorbed most of their parents' criticism and higher expectations by comparison. It's played mostly for comedy, the way the show plays almost everything, but the shape underneath the jokes is fairly consistent. Ross grew up as the child who was allowed to succeed, expected to succeed, and rarely given much practice at failing in front of people who mattered to him. A childhood built around being the reliable one, the accomplished one, the son who got the dinosaur museum job and the doctorate and the quiet parental pride that came with both. Doesn't leave a lot of room to fail loudly and publicly as an adult without it feeling like something has gone catastrophically wrong with the entire architecture of who you're supposed to be. When a person spends their whole childhood as the one who doesn't disappoint, A first divorce doesn't just hurt, it threatens the entire identity that childhood built. A second divorce threatens it more. And a third, as we're about to see, starts to feel less like an event that happened to him and more like a verdict on his character that he'll do almost anything to keep from being formally entered into the record. That lesson would matter enormously later, when the world stopped being the thing taking control away from him, and he started being the one who couldn't stop himself from doing it to somebody else. Before we get to Emily, there's a shorter story worth pausing on, even though it never involves a wedding at all, because it may be the clearest, rawest example of tonight's whole theme playing out in real time, without a marriage license anywhere in sight to soften it. In the show's third season, Ross and Rachel are, for the first time, actually together, not circling each other, not almost, but genuinely a couple. It doesn't last. Ross, gripped by jealousy over Rachel's growing friendship with a male coworker, pushes for what the show frames as a break, someone, a pause, a step back, never fully defined by either of them in the moment they agree to it. Within that undefined space, Ross spends the night with someone else. When Rachel finds out, she is devastated and furious, certain that what happened counts as a betrayal, regardless of any technicality about labels. Ross, for his part, insists, then, and for years afterward, in and out of the show itself, that a break means single, and that nothing he did violated anything real. Here's what's worth sitting with, gently then taking sides on. According to people who worked on the show, the breakup itself was never part of the original plan for these two characters. The writers had initially intended to bring Ross and Rachel together and simply let them stay together. It was only once they were living inside that version of the story that they realized, in their own words, a Ross and Rachel with nothing left to want from each other had become a little boring to write. So they introduced the break and the fallout from it, not because the story demanded it from the outside, but because keeping the two of them safely, permanently together felt like it drained something out of the show. Decades later, cast members still don't agree on how to read what happened. David Schwimmer has said plainly, in interviews, that there's no real ambiguity in his mind, that the two of them were, in his reading, unambiguously on a break. Lisa Kudrow has said her own opinion on the matter shifted over the years, describing a kind of quiet reconsideration long after the show ended. There's a detail from that same stretch of the story worth adding, because it sharpens rather than softens the point. The person Ross spends the night with during the break is a woman named Chloe, someone he barely knows, met almost by chance during the same stretch of distance he just insisted on creating. It isn't a slow burn betrayal, built up over weeks of temptation. It happens almost immediately, as though the break itself had been less about needing space and more about needing an exit already prepared, just in case the fear turned out to be justified. And when the dust settles, when the label gets argued over for the rest of the show's run and for decades of interviews afterward, Ross moves fairly quickly into the string of shorter relationships we're about to meet in this next chapter. Julie, then Bonnie, then eventually Emily, each one arriving close enough on the heels of the last that there's rarely much room left over for him to actually sit with what happened, alone, without somebody new to reach for. Notice what this details actually reveals underneath the debate about labels and technicalities that fans still argue over online to this day. Ross, sensing Rachel's attention drifting even slightly towards someone else, doesn't sit with that fear. He acts on it, first by demanding distance as a kind of preemptive protection, and then, within that self-created distance, by doing something that guarantees the very loss he was afraid of in the first place. It's the same shape we're going to watch play out 3 more times across 3 marriages, just without a ring or a courthouse attached to it yet. Fear of losing control of the relationship, A move made to regain that control, and the move itself becoming the thing that costs him the relationship regardless. We're not here to rule on who was right in that argument tonight. Genuinely, people who worked on the show for decades still don't agree with each other, so it would be strange for us to hand down a verdict from a sleep-focused video about it. What we can say is that the pattern was already fully formed by season 3, years before Ross ever stood in front of Emily, or a judge, or a chapel in Las Vegas. Between Carol and Emily, the show gives Ross a long string of shorter relationships. Julie, a graduate school colleague. Bonnie, briefly, memorably bald. Also of others who pass through an episode or two and quietly disappear. None of them are given the weight of a wedding, but the pattern is already visible in miniature if you watch closely. Ross tends to move quickly, attach quickly, and panic quickly the moment something threatens the relationship's stability. Jealousy flaring at the smallest provocation, small lies told to smooth over insecurity. An almost compulsive need to know exactly where he stands with someone at all times. None of those relationships end in divorce, because none of them make it to marriage. But they're worth noticing as the quiet rehearsal space where the same fear kept testing itself out, in smaller rooms before the stakes got large enough for a wedding again. By the show's 4th season, after Carol and after that string of shorter relationships, Ross meets Emily Waltham, a sharp, composed Englishwoman, the niece of Rachel's boss at the time. Played by actress Helen Baxendale, Emily arrives in the story already established as someone with her own clear sense of what she wants, unimpressed by charm for its own sake, unwilling to simply be swept along by Ross's usual momentum without asking real questions first. It's part of what makes her interested in him at all. He has to work for her attention in a way he hasn't always had to with other partners. And it's part of what makes the eventual unraveling sting so specifically. She wasn't someone who drifted into the relationship passively. She chose it carefully, and the choice gets detonated, publicly, at the one moment she should have been able to trust completely. The relationship moves fast, faster than most of Ross's relationships across the series. An engagement follows within months. A wedding is planned in London. A full production. Ross's parents and all 5 friends flying overseas for the ceremony. Pause on that speed for a moment, because speed itself tells you something. By this point in the series, Ross has already lived through one marriage taken from him without warning. A man who has learned that stability can vanish overnight doesn't necessarily respond by moving carefully. Sometimes he responds by grabbing at the next available version of stability as fast as his hands will let him, proposing quickly, planning quickly, crossing the ocean to make it official as soon as possible, as though speed itself were a kind of insurance against the version of loss he already knows too well. It's not hard to see the engagement to Emily less as a grand romantic gesture and more as an attempt to outrun something. Marrying fast doesn't leave much time for doubt to catch up with you. It also doesn't leave much time for 2 people to actually learn whether the foundation underneath the wedding can hold any weight at all. The wedding itself, when it finally arrives, is staged as the show's biggest production to date. London, a full church ceremony, Emily's family looking on, Ross's parents seated in an unfamiliar country for the occasion, and all 5 friends crammed into pews thousands of miles from Central Perk. Is the kind of elaborate, expensive, once-in-a-lifetime setting that makes what happens next land even harder than it might have in a smaller room. What happens at that wedding is, by a wide margin, the single most famous moment of Ross's entire arc across the series, and one of the most famous individual moments in the show's 10-year history. Standing at the altar, reciting his vows in front of Emily, her family, and everyone he loves, Ross says the wrong name. Not a stumble, not a mumble, a full, clear, unmistakable sentence. I, Ross, take thee, Rachel. Not Emily, Rachel. The woman he had spent years circling, missing, almost having, not having, since the very first season of the show. Here's the detail that makes the moment worth sitting with rather than just laughing at. It wasn't written that way. According to accounts from the people involved in the production, the mistake began as exactly that, a mistake, made by David Schwimmer himself during rehearsal, saying the wrong name entirely by accident while running through the vows. And according to reporting on how the moment made it to screen, the instant it happened, the people in the room recognized they'd stumbled onto something the show hadn't planned for, but suddenly, unmistakably, needed. It wasn't smoothed over. It wasn't corrected in a later take. It was written into the episode exactly as it had first happened by accident, and delivered on camera the same way, turning a rehearsal slip into the single most consequential sentence Ross Geller says in the entire series. Sit with that for a second. The way you might sit with a name that surfaces in a dream uninvited. An actor thinking about an entirely different scene, an entirely different rehearsal. Said the wrong name, and the wrong name he happened to say was the one name that, years later, still explains more about his character than almost anything the writers deliberately constructed. There's something almost eerie about how well an accident fit, as if the years of unresolved feeling toward Rachel had simply been sitting somewhere underneath the character the whole time, waiting for exactly the wrong moment, his own wedding, to someone else to surface entirely on its own, with no warning, from an actor who wasn't even trying to make it happen. This is the second time the ground shifts under Ross without him choosing it. But notice what's different now. With Carol, the world changed, and he had no part in it at all. Here, at his own wedding, in his own voice, something inside him changed the moment for everyone in that room. And he didn't decide to do it. It simply happened. The way a hand might shake before you've consciously decided to be nervous. The fear of losing control has stopped being something that only happens to him from the outside. It has started, quietly, to live inside his own mouth. The wedding proceeds anyway. Emily, after a pause that plays out as one of the longest, most excruciating silences in the show's history, tells the registrar to continue, and they marry. But the marriage that follows is never really allowed to recover from that opening wound. It's worth pausing on Emily's position for a moment too. It gently, rather than rushing past her toward Ross's side of the story alone. Imagine standing at the altar of your own wedding, in front of your family, hearing the person you're about to marry say someone else's name, at a stranger's name, but the name of a woman his friends have spent years half-joking is his soulmate. Whatever Emily does next, it starts from that wound, a public, humiliating, entirely reasonable wound, and it's worth remembering that before judging what she does with it. According to the show's storyline in the following season, Emily grows increasingly consumed by what happened at the altar and by Ross's ongoing closeness with Rachel, a closeness that, to be fair to Emily, was never entirely unfounded. She issues an ultimatum. Ross must cut Rachel out of his life completely, never speak to her, never see her, if the marriage is going to survive. What follows in the show plays partly for comedy. Ross, attempting increasingly absurd lengths to technically comply with Emily's demand, while still finding ways to be near Rachel, including, at one point, trying to erase Rachel from his own retelling of stories to their mutual friends, as though editing the past might somehow satisfy a partner who's really asking for something the past can't give her. But underneath the comedy is something worth noticing without the laugh track attached. For the first time in the series, Ross is on the other side of the exact fear that seems to define him. Someone else is now the one terrified of losing control of a relationship. Someone else is the one making desperate, controlling demands to try to hold on to something that already feels like it's slipping. And Ross, who understands that fear more intimately than almost any character on the show, who has lived inside it since Carol left, cannot bring himself to accommodate it in Emily. He chooses Rachel's friendship. The marriage ends. There's a quiet, uncomfortable symmetry worth pausing on here, gently, before we move forward. Ross knows exactly what it feels like to watch someone you love slip away for reasons outside your control. He learned that lesson in the very first chapter of tonight's story. Then yet, faced with a partner terrified of the same thing happening to her, he becomes the reason it happens anyway. Whether that makes him the villain of his second marriage or simply another person caught in a situation neither of them built cleanly, the show never quite says outright. And honestly, neither will we. Tonight, it's a question worth letting sit unanswered for a while, the way most real disagreements between two people who once loved each other tend to sit unanswered, long after the divorce papers are signed. There's a production detail tangled up in how quickly this second marriage unravels on screen, and it's worth mentioning gently, because it shaped the story as much as any writer's room decision did. Helen Baxendale became pregnant with her own child between the show's 4th and 5th seasons, which meant she was largely unable to travel back to film additional scenes as Emily once the character had relocated to London within the story. The unraveling of Ross and Emily's marriage plays out as a result, mostly at a distance. Phone calls, faxes, something, an ocean between the two of them, rather than the kind of extended in-person conflict earlier relationships on the show were given room to work through. There's something quietly fitting about that, even if it was never intended as commentary. A marriage that began with a mistake spoken out loud, in person, in front of a packed church, ends almost entirely off-screen, through distance and static, without either of them ever really getting a final scene together to close it properly. Some endings get a door slamming shut. This one mostly just got quieter and quieter until it stopped. Hold on to that quiet contradiction too. We're going to need it. One more time before the end of tonight's story, because the third marriage is the one where Ross finally stops being the person something happens to and becomes entirely and privately the person making it happen. By the show's 5th season, Ross and Rachel's relationship has spent years in the particular kind of orbit long-running television shows are built on. Close, then apart, then close again, never quite landing anywhere permanent. It's worth remembering, briefly, that this particular orbit wasn't only written that way. Years later, at the 2021 reunion special, Jennifer Aniston and David Schwimmer both confirmed something fans had suspected for decades. During the show's earliest seasons, the two of them had genuine feelings for each other off-screen, timing that never quite lined up because one of them was always seeing someone else. Whatever chemistry audiences kept watching for a decade wasn't entirely acting. At the end of that 5th season, the two of them traveled to Las Vegas together, still not officially a couple, still circling each other the way they've circled each other since episode 1. What happens that night in Vegas becomes, by some measures, the single most talked about plot twist in the show's entire run. The details, as they play out on screen, are almost deliberately silly on the surface, the kind of chaos built for laughs rather than gravity. But Ross and Rachel spend the night drinking, teasing each other. At one point, Ross draws a mustache on Rachel's sleeping face with a marker. Somewhere in the haze of that same long, drunken night, the two of them end up at a wedding chapel, and this part isn't a set built on a studio backlot the way so much of the show was. It's a real, still operating Las Vegas landmark called a Little White Chapel. The same all-hours drive-up chapel that has married Michael Jordan, Britney Spears, and Elvis impersonators by the thousands since the 1950s. You can still book a wedding there tonight. The same building, decades later. Other you happen to want one. By morning, Ross and Rachel are, legally, husband and wife. Neither of them remembers deciding to do it. Neither of them, in the moment they wake up and realize what happened, wants it to be real. What follows across the next season is where the story stops being silly and becomes, quietly, one of the more revealing stretches of Ross's entire arc. Rachel wants the marriage annulled immediately, cleanly, with no complications, erased, essentially, as though it never happened. Ross agrees to handle it. He tells her he's taking care of it, and according to the storyline that unfolds across the following episodes, he doesn't. The show spends real time on the mechanics of trying to undo the marriage, and the specific reason it falls apart is worth knowing, because it's sharper and stranger than the paperwork didn't cooperate. In front of a judge, attempting to qualify for an annulment rather than a full divorce, Rachel fills out the grounds for the annulment with a reason that isn't quite true. And when the judge realizes the two of them had actually known each other and been involved with each other long before that night in Vegas, she refuses to grant it. An annulment, on paper, means the marriage technically never legally counted at all. A divorce would be a third one for Ross. The story he's built his whole defense around, that this was a meaningless accident between virtual strangers, collapses the moment a judge looks closely enough to notice it wasn't. And rather than accept a third divorce and move forward honestly, Ross quietly lets the whole process stall out, unresolved, technically still married, and says nothing further about it to the one person who most needed to know. There's something almost painfully specific about the shape of that particular choice, if you slow down enough to sit with it. He isn't lying to avoid consequences in some abstract sense. He's lying to avoid a number, a literal count. The difference between 2 divorces and 3. As though the universe were keeping a scoreboard somewhere, and he still had a chance to keep his final tally 1 digit lower than it was about to become. It's the most concrete, almost childlike version of the fear we've been tracing all night, stripped down to its simplest form. Not fear of losing Rachel specifically, in this particular moment, but fear of what the number itself would say about him, to anyone counting, including himself. Here's the reveal worth sitting with, the one that television critics and longtime fans alike have pointed to, years later, as the moment Ross's pattern stops being sympathetic and starts being something closer to a real betrayal. Ross, privately, quietly, without telling Rachel, does not file the annulment paperwork. He lets the deadline pass. He lets the marriage remain legally active for months, all while allowing Rachel to believe the whole thing had already been dissolved and erased. When he finally admits what happened, the reason he gives isn't romantic, and it isn't really about Rachel at all. It's about him. He couldn't stand the idea of having 3 failed marriages attached to his name before the age of 40. Divorced once by Carol's choice, divorced a second time by his own mistake at the altar, a third divorce, even from a marriage that had barely lasted a night, felt to him like a public verdict on who he was as a person. So instead of facing that verdict, he simply didn't. He let the paperwork sit. He let Rachel walk around for months believing a lie he had constructed entirely out of his own fear, not out of any deception aimed at hurting her specifically, though the effect, once she discovered it, was exactly that kind of hurt regardless of his intentions. This is the moment worth returning to everything we've built across tonight's story. In the first marriage, the world took control away from Ross entirely, without his consent, without warning, and he learned that loss could arrive from nowhere. In the second marriage, something inside him, unplanned, unscripted, entirely outside his conscious control, surfaced at the worst possible moment and took the choice out of his own hands, at his own wedding, in his own voice. By the third marriage, something has shifted all the way over. Ross is no longer the person things happen to. He is, quietly, secretly, over the course of several months, the person doing the hiding, the person making the choice, the person deciding that a lie he can control is safer than a truth he can't. The exact fear that was done to him by Carol, the fear of watching something get taken away without warning, has become, by his third marriage, something he's willing to do to somebody else, in private, rather than risk feeling it happen to him one more time. Rachel eventually discovers the truth, and the fury that follows plays out across several episodes. One of the more sustained, serious conflicts in the entire show's run, without much comedic cushioning around it. The marriage ends in an actual, real divorce not long after. This one entirely undisguised, entirely acknowledged. Only 3 weddings, 3 divorces. A man who had, by his own admission, chosen secrecy over honesty, the one time secrecy was fully, completely his own decision to make. It doesn't end their story. Of course, Ross and Rachel spend the next several seasons in the same familiar orbit they'd occupied since the beginning. Close, then distant, then close again. An unplanned pregnancy leading to their daughter, Emma. A series of near reconciliations that don't quite land, right up until the show's final episode, when Rachel gives up a job offer in Paris to stay, and Ross, in turn, finally says the thing out loud instead of circling it. Whatever the 3 marriages taught him, or failed to teach him, the show chooses to end on the belief that something, eventually, landed differently this last time. Whether that's earned by everything we've walked through tonight, or simply granted because 10 years of television needs a soft place to land, is something you're welcome to decide for yourself. Slowly, as you drift, it's worth remembering, gently, as we come toward the end of tonight's story, that the people who built this character never pretended he was simple. Marta Kaufman, one of the show's co-creators, has spoken about the choice to keep Ross and Rachel apart for so much of the series, noting, in interviews, that the 2 characters were, in her words, more interesting wanting each other than they ever were actually having each other. There's something almost sad hidden inside that piece of writer's room philosophy, if you sit with it long enough tonight. The show's own creators understood that Ross functioned best, dramatically, in a state of almost, although married, almost losing someone, almost getting it right. Maybe that's simply good television craft. Or maybe it's an accidental, honest portrait of a particular kind of person. Selected who reaches for control the moment he senses he might lose it, then in reaching, tends to lose it anyway. One more relationship is worth a brief mention here, because it shows the pattern didn't politely stop the moment the 3rd marriage ended. Not long after the Vegas fallout, Ross begins seeing a much younger woman named Elizabeth, a student notably closer in age to his own son than to him, but dynamic the show itself treats as at least somewhat inappropriate. A person freshly reminded he can't be trusted to manage a relationship as an equal sometimes reaches, consciously or not, for one where he holds more of the power by default. The writers had at one point planned a storyline in which Elizabeth's pregnancy would end a season on a cliffhanger, only to reveal the child wasn't his after all, scrapped so the show could focus on a different pregnancy storyline instead. The relationship itself ends the way most of these rebounds do, quietly, without a wedding, another small rehearsal of the same fear before the story moves on. It's easy, walking through Ross's 3 marriages in a straight line like this, to forget he wasn't living through any of them alone, or that the show's own audience has never fully agreed on how to feel about him. Both are worth a moment before we close. The 5 other friends each hold a slightly different relationship to Ross's pattern. Monica tells him the truth most directly, even when he doesn't want to hear it. Chandler needles him about the failed marriages with affectionate exasperation. Joey mostly just shows up. Phoebe, as we already saw in that delivery room closet, cuts through posturing with blunt, oddly wise commentary. And Rachel is inside the pattern rather than watching it from outside. Present for the break, the Val mistake, the Vegas night. Close enough to the center of Ross's fear across 2 decades of story that it's sometimes hard to tell where her patterns end and his begin. None of them ever sits him down and spells out the through line the way tonight's video has tried to. Mostly, they just keep showing up, wedding after wedding without giving up on him. Rewatching the show now, decades later, viewers tend to land in one of two places on Ross, and both are worth naming honestly. One reading, common among newer viewers discovering the show through streaming, is fairly unforgiving. A man who repeatedly prioritizes his own fear over the feelings of the women he claims to love, rewarded by a show that finds his neediness endearing rather than alarming. The other reading, closer to how the show was originally received, is gentler without being blind to his flaws. Ross as the character the show chose to be honest about, whose jealousy is played as a flaw rather than a virtue, whose hiding of the Vegas paperwork is treated on screen as a real betrayal with real consequences, not brushed aside. Both readings are available in the same footage. Neither is simply wrong. A person built from 10 years of scripts and one very specific set of unplanned accidents was never going to sort cleanly into either box. And that messiness might be the most honest thing about him. 3 marriages, very different women, 3 completely different reasons on the surface for why each one ended. Also, psychology writers who've looked at Ross Geller over the years describe his pattern using the language of anxious attachment, with deep fear of abandonment, a tendency to read minor stress as a major crisis, a near constant need for reassurance that the people closest to you aren't drifting away. It's worth being careful here. Ross is a fictional character built by a room full of comedy writers, not a real patient, and nobody can diagnose a sitcom character with any certainty. But as a lens for the 3 marriages we've just walked through, it fits uncannily well. Carol taught him that the ground can move without asking permission, that someone can simply discover something true about themselves and walk toward it. And there's nothing you did wrong, and nothing you can do differently that would have kept the floor from shifting anyway. Emily taught him what it feels like to be on the other side of that fear, to watch someone else become desperate and controlling out of the exact terror he understood better than almost anyone, and to realize that understanding someone's fear does not obligate you to accommodate it, even when you know exactly what it costs them. And Rachel, the marriage that should have mattered least. A single drunken night in a Las Vegas chapel neither of them chose ended up revealing the most, because that was the one time nobody else made the decision for him. Not Carol's discovery about herself, not an accidental slip of the tongue at an altar, just Ross, alone, with paperwork sitting on a desk, choosing silence over honesty because silence felt, to him, like the only kind of control he had left. Whether Ross Geller ever actually understood any of this about himself, whether he ever recognized the same fear wearing 3 different disguises across 10 years and 3 marriages, the show never really says. He goes on, after all 3 divorces, to eventually build a life with Rachel that the finale suggests will finally hold. Maybe that ending means he learned something, somewhere along the way. Or maybe it just means the story ended before we got to find out whether the pattern was ever going to repeat itself a 4th time. That's not really a question this video is going to answer for you tonight. It's the kind of question that's better carried gently into sleep than solved before it. There's a particular kind of quiet that follows each of these 3 endings too, if you let yourself picture it slowly, one at a time. After Carol, the morning after is mostly just absence. An apartment that used to hold 2 people's belongings, now holding 1 person's. A silence where a second set of footsteps used to be. Ross doesn't get a scene of confrontation or closure here, not really. He just gets the quiet, ordinary, unglamorous work of learning to live inside a life that changed shape without asking him first. 1 empty drawer and 1 unfamiliar Tuesday morning at a time. After Emily, the morning after is longer and stranger, stretched out across an ocean in a season of static and distance, rather than contained in a single day. There's no single scene of Ross standing in a doorway watching her leave. There's just a slow accumulation of missed calls and unanswered letters, and a marriage that thins out gradually until one day it simply isn't one anymore. Closer to erosion than collapse. After the truth about the paperwork finally comes out, after the fight that follows it, after the divorce that's finally allowed to be real and undisguised, the morning after is the sharpest of the three. Because for once, everyone in the story knows exactly what happened and exactly whose decision caused it. There's no ambiguity to soften this one. No external force to blame. No accident to point to. Just Ross, in the quiet aftermath, having to sit with the specific, undiluted knowledge that this particular ending was the one he built himself. Brick by brick, out of months of silence. 3 mornings after 3 different kinds of quiet, and underneath all 3 of them, the same man, waking up slightly more alone each time. Still not entirely sure how he keeps ending up back in this particular room. There's one more door worth mentioning before we close, even though it isn't attached to a wedding or a divorce at all. In the show's final episode, years after the 3rd marriage ended, Rachel prepares to leave for a job in Paris, an entire ocean away. A permanent kind of distance. The sort of ending the show has flirted with before but never quite let land. Ross, watching her pack, watching the version of loss he spent 10 years and 3 marriages afraid of, finally arrive in its clearest form yet. Does something worth noticing against everything we've walked through tonight. He doesn't demand anything.
He doesn't issue an ultimatum, the way Emily once did, or disappear into avoidance, the way he did with the annulment paperwork. According to how the finale plays out, he goes to the airport, not to stop her, but to tell her, plainly, that he loves her. And then, just as importantly, to let her go anyway, to actually get on a plane, before she chooses, on her own, without any pressure from him, to get off it and stay. It's a small distinction, but it might be the whole point of tonight's story sitting quietly inside a single scene. For the first time across 3 marriages and 1 very famous break, Ross doesn't try to control the outcome. He says the true thing and then removes his hands from the situation entirely. And the ending he wants only happens because someone else chooses it freely, on the other side of an airplane door he didn't try to hold open by force. Maybe that's the 4th door of tonight's story, the one he finally manages to walk through without gripping the handle so tightly it breaks off in his hand. Whether one scene at an airport genuinely undoes a pattern that took 3 marriages to fully reveal itself is, honestly, more than this video can promise you. But it's the one door in Ross Geller's whole story where the show seems to be gently suggesting he finally got it right, so it feels worth ending on. David Schwimmer, the actor who spent 10 years living inside all of this, has said in interviews that he's generally drawn to characters who are struggling, broken, flawed, only in some kind of pain. Which tracks. Watching Ross's 3 marriages laid out end to end like this, whatever else Ross Geller is, he was never written or played as a simple man, just a frightened one, mostly doing the best he could with a fear he didn't build for himself and never fully learned how to put down. That's where we'll leave Ross Geller tonight. Not laughed at, not defended outright, just looked at closely, the way you might look closely at anyone if you had 10 years of footage and the patience to sit with all of it in order. If you go back through the 3 marriages we've walked through tonight, there's a small, quiet image that keeps recurring, even though nobody ever points a camera at it directly. A door. Carol's apartment door, closing on a marriage Ross never got to argue his way back into. The heavy wooden door of a London church, easing shut behind a wedding party that already knows, somewhere underneath the applause,
that something didn't survive the ceremony intact.
A chapel door in Las Vegas. Cheap and gaudy and lit up pink at 4 in the morning. Swinging open onto a decision neither of them remembers making and closing behind them anyway. Legally, permanently, whether they meant it or not. 3 doors, 3 different rooms he walked out of a slightly different person than he walked in. He never seems to notice the pattern in the doors themselves. Maybe that's the most honest detail of all 3 stories. Not the fear, which the show lets us see clearly enough, but the not noticing. The way the same shape can happen to a person 3 separate times without that person ever quite recognizing it as the same shape, wearing a different coat. There's something worth carrying with you. Past tonight, past this particular character and this particular show. Most of us have some version of this pattern running underneath our own choices somewhere. A fear that shows up in 3 different disguises across 3 different chapters of a life. So well hidden inside each new situation that it takes a long time, maybe years, to notice it's the same fear each time. Wearing a different face, walking through a different door. Ross just happened to have his patterns filmed, edited, and rewatched by hundreds of millions of people for 30 years. Most of us get to keep ours a little more private, which is its own kind of mercy and its own kind of loneliness, depending on the night. You don't have to solve any of this before you fall asleep. That was never really the assignment tonight. Let Ross keep his contradictions. Let the 3 doors stay a little bit open, unresolved, the way most real people's patterns stay unresolved even after they've noticed them. And if your own mind has wandered, you need point tonight toward a pattern of your own, the shape that keeps showing up in your life, wearing a slightly different disguise each time. You don't need to solve that tonight either. Naming it gently, once, quietly, to yourself, while you're already halfway towards sleep, is sometimes plenty. There's no test in the morning. There's just the quiet, and whatever's left of tonight's story still moving softly through the back of your mind as everything else starts to fade. Thank you for spending this part of your night here. If Ross's story kept you company long enough to feel your eyes finally growing heavy, then it did exactly what it was meant to do. If you're still awake, that's all right too. Let the voice keep going, or let it fade into the background, whichever your body needs right now. If this kind of deep, unhurried character story is something you'd like more of, consider subscribing to Sleepy Couch Decoded. And if you're still alert enough to reach for your phone, a like helps this channel find its way to more nights like this one. Rest well. Whatever pattern you're carrying tonight, it can wait until morning. Whatever door closed on you once, without your permission, is allowed to just be a closed door tonight. Not a lesson you have to extract anything from before you're allowed to sleep. And whatever door you might be gripping too tightly yourself, right now, in some part of your life you haven't quite looked at directly yet, that can wait too. It'll still be there tomorrow, a little more visible in daylight. Easier to look at with rested eyes than tired ones. Good night.